Diaz is a photographer and designer established in California, USA. He recently came to Salvador, Bahia, Brazil to present his first solo photographic exhibition called Echoes of the Unseen. The photos exhibited offer quiet contemplation into colorful scenes that we may not notice in our day-to-day. And alongside this exhibition, Kai also conducted a photo walk and a short analog photography workshop here in Salvador. We're going to talk about this experience in the end of the interview. And while he was here in Bahia, as we talked, I was interested to learn more about the thoughts and general work ethic that guided the production of the images I was seeing. And also, the contact with Kai really inspired me to go out and photograph even more than I was photographing. So I was really glad when Kai accepted to give this interview in which we discuss his entry into photography, different aspects of photographing in Bahia compared to photographing in California. And in the end, we're going to bring some more technical guidelines, tips, and tricks for the folks interested in film photography. So yeah, dig in this interview and hope you enjoy. Okay, so hi Kai. Very nice to be interviewing you. You know, we met here in Salvador when you came for your photo exhibition. And well, now you're back in California. But yeah, let's just have some simple chat about your photography practice and exchange a couple of ideas in relation to this. But to start, I would like to know, how did you get into this world of photography? What was your entry to photography like?
Oh man. Okay, so we're going back into the early 90s now. And this was during a time where you know, skateboarding was starting to like really rise into the mainstream, and surfing also. And to me, a big part of that was watching skateboard videos, looking at skateboard magazines, surfing magazines, surfing videos. So I was exposed to a lot of, cinematic approaches to my interests. I didn't know that skateboarding and surfing can look like that. And then at that time too, I was a teenager, so I watched a lot of MTV, and got to see a lot of music videos, and a lot of this stuff at the time I didn't know that was gonna kind of turn into a profession for me. I was just consuming it. So I had no idea that it was kind of shaping how I looked at things. And my entry into photography was skateboarding with my friends and surfing with my friends. And I was always the annoying kid with the camera in everyone's faces, or telling someone, hey, go do that again and shoot it. And I always had a video camera, and I literally was that annoying guy. Like, people would just tell me to like shut it down, like turn that off, get that flash out of my face. But I would just do it because, one, I was trying to emulate what I was seeing in the skateboarding and surfing magazines. And then two, I have this like Peter Pan syndrome of not wanting to forget anything, especially like the really cool moments with my friends and family. I was always a documentarian, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just knew that I had to capture it so that we can look back at it and be like, hey, remember this time? Or, and back then I didn't know an Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that was going to exist. It literally was just film and stacks of tapes and, negatives everywhere. And, this is before the digital age. So that was my entry point. And I would probably blame it on, surfing and skating and just being with my friends all the time, and watching lots of music videos and lots of, movies. So those are the things that kind of got me into it. I wanted to emulate some of the cinematic approaches to capturing a photo, or, making a photo of my friends. So that was my entry point. Which is
and I see like cinema as beauty, so it's like trying to bring up the beauty of what you're seeing, what you're living. And like there are two transitions that I see, like one that could happen but did not happen because, for example, you nowadays you photograph with film. So I wonder if like there was a moment where you got into digital and then you got back to film, or you just like continued photographing to in film like the whole time. Like how is
Uh,
that?
yeah, there definitely was. I feel like at least most photographers I know, I don't know the actual statistic of it, but based on what happened to film, I would assume that most film photographers switched to digital when it came about, because kind of made sense. You're using
Yeah,
less
sure.
film, you could shoot more, you could see it right away. So yes, along with everyone else, I dove into shooting with digital because I'm also a very techie nerd. So I love like technology, and the
Yeah.
idea of being able to see your image instantly was interesting to me. As far as fully switching to digital, I still shot film, but very, very sparingly. I had my digital camera on me all the time because again, it was instant. Um,
Yeah.
and I would only shoot film like every once in a while. And then there was a period where I didn't shoot any film at all. And then I would say around 2015, maybe 2014, I started shooting more film again. I started picking up like my film cameras and started shooting with that. And then around 2018, I started shooting even more and bought like another film camera because at that time they're
Hmm.
super cheap now. You can get them for less than $100. And then I think once the pandemic hit and then film started to really get uh popular again, then
Yeah.
film cameras started rising again, and then now everyone's shooting film, and now at this point in my career, it's what I prefer to shoot in because I got to experience both sides, and there definitely is um, a a feel and a tactile experience of film that I just feel like digital cannot yet emulate. Um, you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and there's just things about film that it just it's hard to describe it. If I could describe it, it's more of just like the way it feels, the way it looks.
Yeah, and like in comparison to your teenage photography, there's another transition that I see occurred at least with the photos that were exhibited in Echoes of the Unseen, the
Mhm.
exhibition you did here in Brazil and Salvador, Bahia.
Yep.
That like you were photographing a lot of your friends and skateboarding and surfing. So I imagine like a lot of action and people. But then
Mhm.
the photographs you bring here in the exhibition, they're pretty quiet and they're photographs that rarely have people. They're more related to colors and geometry and
Mhm.
like documenting the urban experience as well. So like was this always present since you've been photographing, or like was there a moment where you started photographing more, and like would you say that this is like this is a big part of your photographic practice, or this is like what we saw in the exhibition but it does not
Uh,
necessarily represent your practice, I mean?
yeah. I mean, as you're, presenting that question, and this is really cool because this is stuff I don't really
Yeah,
think about until I'm asked it. And
yeah, yeah.
yeah, so um, it's interesting because if you could describe my photography now, especially with what you saw at the exhibit Echoes of the Unseen, what you're seeing there is, I would say, a more mature, more refined me. Um,
Yeah.
and my work, I would say it just kind of evolved with where I was in life. So obviously I was a teenage boy back then, and everything was just very energetic, action, silly, like stupid stuff. Like, you know,
Hmm.
I grew up in the Jackass stage. Do you know Jackass? Like on
No,
MTV?
I'm gonna Google it here because
Yeah. It's it's a bunch of these skateboarders that just do stupid stuff, and they're really popular in the early 2000s. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, so that, we were doing that kind of stuff when I was a teenager, and then as I got older, um, I feel like my being an introvert just really like just it just grew more being an introvert. So the less and less I wanted to be around lots of people. And there was a time where I thought there was something wrong with me. And I thought, I was like, I wish I was more outgoing like this person. And then I read a book, and it made me feel better that, like, hey, you're just an introvert. Like the way
Like what book was it?
Shoot, it was, I forget the name of it. But it talked about uh, I'll find out. Let me find out the
Yeah,
name
yeah,
of
yeah,
it.
sure.
But basically, it talked about social currency and being an introvert and it being okay. Like there's nothing wrong with you. So I embraced it more. So that's why the work that you're seeing now has less people, and more about the, like, I guess we would call it still life. And if
Yeah.
there are people in it, it's more maybe one person, and it's the person that I had a conversation with, and then I asked them for a portrait. So now I'm in my 40s. It's more about that. It's more about just being on my own, going on these photo walks by myself, and less time with like the social aspect of photography. Although I do um, find exhilaration when I do street style photography.
Yeah.
But that is also kind of in my, even though I'm around a lot of people when I'm doing that, in my mind, I'm still in my own little world. I'm just kind of like a little like fly on the wall, just kind of observing. And that's one of my favorite pastimes, is just observing human behavior, and just almost kind of creating a story in my mind of like, I wonder what that person's going through. I hope they're okay. Oh man, I can tell that person's really happy. Or look at how that mother's holding their child. Just things like that interest me a lot more now that I'm older. So there definitely was a transition between, I wouldn't even call it work back then. It was just, I just photographed, because I didn't know what I was going to do with it. Um, to now where it's more, you could tell I spent a little more time on that scene or on that frame. It's very slow, very methodic, um, and a lot less people, and you don't really see me shooting a lot of, unless it's for client work, for a brand or something like
Yeah.
that.
Mhm.
Most of the time you won't see me, doing portraits of like a model or something like that. That just, it doesn't really interest me to make photographs of models, like attractive people. So to me, I like to make more pictures of real stuff, just being out in the real world. And then also, just like the show Echoes of the Unseen, I like to give attention to things that as a society we don't really pay much attention to, at least in American society. The things that we just overlook all the time, whether it's an object or a scene, and even people. Sometimes I meet people that I can tell maybe they're don't have really good self-esteem or a good self-image of themselves. So I will challenge myself to make a portrait of them that will make them feel like they're seen, not necessarily like, uh, oh, I'm beautiful or handsome. It's more of like, I just want you to know that like, I appreciate you, and I want you to feel like you're seen. And that's important to a lot of people because, growing up, being brown in America, um, there's a lot of times when I was a kid, I felt unseen. I didn't see people like me a lot in the mainstream. So I
Yeah.
think that's why my work now is so, I wouldn't say focused, but it just captures my attention more. Things that are don't get a lot of representation, things that, we just walk by all the time. And those are the things that interest me now. So you'll see a lot of that in my work.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. And I was thinking about like you were talking about photographing people, and we talked a little bit about this during the exhibition with a couple of
Mhm.
other people, and you were like sharing your approach into photographing people.
Yeah,
Like
I
yeah,
remember that conversation.
yeah, it was a good conversation.
Yeah,
Like that's
yeah, it
why
was
I'm
good.
bringing it up again because
Yeah,
I wanted to share through the interview
yeah,
too. So
yeah.
because you were talking about how you approach people and then the language you use, both verbal but also like
Mm.
body language and stuff. Like,
Yeah, especially if I'm out on the street and I'm just out on a photo walk, and there's interesting people or main characters that I would love to photograph. My approach to it, honestly, is to try and give off an energy that is non-threatening. So I'm
yeah,
smiling like a lot, and a smile honestly goes a long way. I just kind of walk
yeah,
around and I'll smile, and I'll give off the energy that I'm really enjoying myself in whatever scene that we're in. Um, and it's all about energy. I wouldn't really say the type of clothes I wear or anything like that. It's more about the energy and just feeling the room is what we say here is just feel the room, feel the energy. And then sometimes I'll feel the energy from someone that I could tell, like, don't go in their space, you know. And then there's some energy where I feel okay to get in their space and make a photograph. And then sometimes I take the shot first and then I talk to them, or sometimes I talk to them and then I make the shot later. So it just kind of depends, and that's what I really like about street photography is it's literally like on the fly. Like you
yeah,
could be walking and you could instantly know, like, I have to make this shot before they change their body language or before they notice that I'm there. And then there's some where maybe I missed the shot, but they looked really interesting. And then I'll approach them and say, hey, I really love your look, or I love your outfit. Where did you get that? And then I'll show my camera. I'm like, would you mind if I make a portrait? And then I go and send it to them and, get their contact. And then it becomes this little conversation. Sometimes it turns into something really cool. Then I've made friends that way too. They're just like, oh, like, I love your work, or like, let's go hang out sometime. I'm like, yeah, sure. So um that's kind of my approach, is to, I guess it's more about just respect. I never want to get in someone's space that they don't really want their photograph taken, and it could possibly ruin their day. So um I tread very lightly, and but yeah, I would say that's my overall approach, is just making sure to be human, and respect
yeah, yeah,
people's space. There's some photographers out there that just go and do it. They don't have that fear, or um they just want the shot that bad. And you know I'm not saying that's wrong or whatever. That's just their style of approaching photography, street photography. Not necessarily mine. Um, I kind of like to make sure that the human element is still there, and that there's a connection, because I'm not gonna want a photograph of, like, oh man, this guy really wanted to beat me up. Like, I don't I don't want that type of energy. So
yeah, for sure. Photography and the relationships you build. So
yeah.
this is awesome. And like in this conversation we had in the exhibition, you were bringing your perspective from California, and other people were bringing the perspectives, you know, photographing here in Salvador, Bahia, Brazil, and some things are exactly the same. But I was wondering, like, how different was photographing in Bahia, Brazil, compared with California in the U.S. Like, in relation to posture first, like being perceived as someone with a camera, was this different? Like, did you feel yourself different? I know language maybe was something too, but even prior to speaking.
Yeah, you know, again, going back to being sensitive about how I'm being received in as a foreigner and as someone that is not from there. Um, it was all about respect first, you know. So I would see someone see me, and then I would kind of gauge that energy. Like, is that look more of a curiosity, or is that look more of like, what the hell are you doing here? You know, with that camera. And
Yeah.
most of the time, it was curiosity. It was like probably 98% curiosity. Like, oh, this guy's not from here. He dresses different. He's wearing shoes. Why is he wearing shoes? It's so hot. And so it was more about really just kind of respecting again the space and me not being from there, because the last thing I want is to be seen as like this tourist person just not respecting anything and just pop 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 pop. I've seen that, and it's so cringy to me when I see tourists do that
Yeah.
in other countries. So for me, it was more of like I wanted to make that connection first, smile, or even I'll let them even see me first, and then see my camera, and then they go on about their day. Maybe they're setting up the shop or something, and then sometimes I'll point at my camera and go like, "Hey, is this okay?" And then they'll give me the thumbs up, and I'm like, "Okay, cool." Um, but yeah, I think that was the main difference. Is just I really wanted to be sensitive to everyone's day to day, because the last thing I want is for someone to feel like, oh, am I a character to you, or am I like a tourist attraction to you? You know, when I'm just here trying to live my life, and in my work, I like to show the positive things about what people might see as negative. I like to show that, like, hey, in this part of town, maybe it's not so affluent, or there's a lot of money here, but look at how happy they are. Like, there's bless you, Saudi.
Thank you.
But yeah, so that was more my approach, and I would say the fundamental difference that I saw right away, here in the United States, in America, it's very people are very self-aware of their body, you know. So here, if you were to, let's say, take a picture of a girl, right away she's gonna be like, oh, is my stomach showing, or is, my arm, does it look fat, or this and that, and does my forehead look, this and that. There, I didn't see any of that at all. There's no shame in how the body looks. In there, it's like everyone embraced and almost was proud of the way their body is. Like, this is me, this is who I am. And when I did make some portraits of the friends that I made at the show at the Macaco Labs, that was amazing to me. There wasn't any of like, oh, do I look all right? Like, do I look fat in his jeans? Like, there was none of that. No covering anything. I was like, man, this is really cool. Because here it's hard. It's hard to try and make a portrait of someone when all these insecurities are so apparent. And then you have to try and like navigate through that, like, okay, maybe turn this way, all this. And I love the fact that when I did make portraits in Bahia, they just gave me themselves. Like, this is me,
Mm-hmm.
take it or leave it, you
Yeah.
know? So, yeah, that was one thing I really enjoyed. And something that I'm trying to take a piece of back here about myself. You know, if someone's making a portrait or a picture of me, I got to just let it go. Like, hey, this is me, you know, like, um, you know, you can point it out if you want, but if you body shame me, that's more of just like a reflection of your person, you know, like that's like, what kind
Yeah.
of person are you that's gonna tell someone that, like, oh, look at your little fat little stomach, you know, like, you don't want to hang out with that type, you know.
No, you
So
don't.
yeah, so that was one of the things, and I would say the main differentiators from you know, shooting here in the
And I was wondering also in relation to architecture and composition itself, like what were the differences you perceived in relation to photographing in California, photographing here in Brazil? Like how
wow.
the space and the colors went.
Yeah, so when I was in Brasilia, um, the architecture there was amazing. Everything felt like
Yeah.
art. And the way everything was spaced out, the way the city was designed, um, it was just beautiful. The museum there was like nothing I've ever seen here, and it just made me realize how artistic and creative Brazilians are. I learned about a lot of really like prolific architects, and designers, graphic designers, and my mentor, my design mentor and good friend Marcelo. I could see a lot of his influence. Like, you know, I'm like, oh, now I see why you design this way, or what interests you, and why you do your curves like this, and why you select these colors. I can see it now. And then when I got to Bahia, you know, obviously there's that colonial architecture that is beautiful in its own way, but you know, when I learned about it and really looked at it, I'm like, yeah, it's beautiful, it looks cool. But then when you think about the story of how it got there, it's like, okay, it's kind of like it's beautiful, it's cool now, but you know, this was a colonial period where there's a lot of stuff that was happening that is not good at all, you know. But you look at what it is now, and it's like kind of like it's like it's so beautiful now, but like, would it be there if that stuff didn't happen? Of course, we didn't want that to happen, but you know, so I felt myself conflicted, like, because
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I visually enjoy it, and I visually um love the experience of the people. But then when I start to read on the history, and the locals are telling me about, for instance, Pelourinho, and I'm like, yeah, this place is cool. And then I learned what Pelourinho actually means in Portuguese, and I was like, oh, why is it called that? And then A, B, and C, I'm like, oh man, what a dark time. And it's amazing to see that the residents there and the people there um, was able to rise above that and create a shine, you know, through a dark period. So that was like one of the things that, you know, again, I was like kind of conflicted of, you know, do I make photographs of this? And, you know, I end up doing it. I end up photographing it. And then there's that inner conversation I have myself, like, is this something I'll ever share, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this something that's just going to stay for my own memories? And then also the favelas, you know, um, I'm sure there, you know, you drive past it, through it all the time. To me, I found myself staring at it all the time. It's just always like, whoa, that's so crazy. The juxtaposition of like, I see this like this gigantic shopping mall, and then just right behind that in the background is this favela, you know, going into the heavens. Like, and was driving in a car with the window up because I didn't know if the driver wanted me to have it down because AC and stuff. So I had to shoot it through the tinted window. So it didn't really look that good, but in my mind, it's so burned in, and even though the favelas represent, poverty and survival and just overall tough living, I somehow found beauty in it. Just looking at it and also driving through it and seeing the people still laughing and still being with each other, still doing their day-to-day thing, and I still found beauty in it.
You were mentioning in relation to the photos you made here in Salvador, the ones that you're sure you're gonna put out, and also the ones that you're gonna have more for yourself, at least until you decide in relation to what you're gonna do with them. But nevertheless, like, you took those photos. You did not
Yeah.
stop yourself from taking it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, this is a kind of a side question, but like, roughly how many photographs do you think you made here in Bahia? In Bahia specifically?
Ooh, so I really only had one full day of exploration. And with that said, I shot 17 rolls of film. So I would say that was maybe 500 frames, like around there.
Nice,
And
nice.
yeah, and then in those 500 frames, I finally got to go through all of them. And at this time, I would say maybe there's like 50 keepers. Like keepers, as in I'll probably share it either online or print it in a book in the future. And I say currently because there are times where I'll go revisit it like a month later and look through them again, and then find that the photo that I didn't like, I actually like. I'm like, oh, actually, there's something here. I remember this story. So currently, that's how many I have through all of that. Just a lot.
Yeah, totally, totally.
Yeah.
You made good use of your time.
Yeah, and a lot of it honestly was more for memories, not necessarily for, work. It probably won't be printed or anything like that. It's more just for me and to share with my new Baiano friends. I made lots of portraits of people and a lot of people that helped with the exhibition. And I wanted to, again, especially the ones that probably don't get their photograph taken a lot. I made sure to give them that one-on-one attention and make them feel special for, that 10-15 minutes, and then give them something to remember that time we spent together.
And like, I remember I was seeing a short video from Rick Rubin, and he talks a lot about art and stuff. And he was saying like how he approaches art as like a diary entry. And like when you do a diary entry, you're not wondering like, oh, how are other people gonna like relate to this, because it's important to you, and like that's what matters. But I remember that there was this person that commented after looking through all the photos in the exhibition, Echoes of the Unseen, how your photos were like pretty solar and pretty vibrant, pretty like cheerful. Even though they were like all from, quiet and still life and composition of places, but the colors you brought, the way you portrayed it, and then you were reflecting about how you take a lot of photographs that are maybe in rainy days, or a lot of like black and white photographs. So like, have you reflected maybe more about this, and like, what is this choice in relation to like the diary entry you make for yourself and the one that you put outside, and like in relation to mood even,
Yeah, I remember that conversation, and I'm glad you brought it up because again, it was something I had never thought about until that person asked it. That person asked, like, the photographs I was showing was very vibrant and colorful, and some would, probably most people would say it looks happy because it's vibrant colors, warm colors, and after I had a second to think about it, it does definitely go with the mood, and it gives you kind of like an entry into who I am as a person. And I remember telling that person, it's probably because of my own personality, and what I like to express out into the world is more positivity and showing happiness, because I want other people to get that and feel that from me, so that maybe it'll help cheer them up, or if they're having a bad day, or just give them that little, like, that boost of energy, of positivity. And no one is 100% positive all the time. People have their dark stuff that's buried within, and they normally don't show that. At least I don't. It's usually just kept in, and it's kind of a cultural thing. Growing up, it's you don't talk about your problems. You don't act like there's anything wrong. That's kind of how I grew up, especially in my own family. And if you're going to express something, it's more of on a positive side. So I do have photographs are a little bit more moody, and probably taken when I was in a dark place, or whether I was depressed or sad. Or most artists have work like that, where it's you could tell they're sad. Like, I think, like, for example, Tim Burton is one of my favorite filmmakers. A lot of his stuff was dark, Halloween-y, kind of creepy. And then you'll notice he got married. I fell in love, got married, and then he came out with the movie Big Fish, which is very happy, and it's just like this, like, fantastic world that, like, you want to experience, and it's a fairy tale. And you could see that, like, it reflects on where he was in life. And that's kind of, I guess, where I go with my own work and what I choose to share. Maybe at some point I'll share some of the stuff where I was in a darker place, but right now I think this is the kind of stuff that the world needs. Something to kind of cheer them up and remind us of the beauties in the world that we just kind of walk by. And I wouldn't say not appreciate it. It's just when you walk by something every day, you don't get attention to it. And the feeling that I love to have all the time is, when I walk outside, is just noticing all those little things, and it really does something for your serotonin levels every day, when you're genuinely like, oh my God, look at this flower. Like, just stop and look at it for a second, smell it, like, think about, like, the what it had to do to grow, things like that. And just appreciate those things.
And like this aspect of bringing the beauty in the world, I think that like, from my experience, I see how people are also grateful for it. Like, I was in a couple of days, just in a very intensive days of studying some material with a couple of friends in this activity, and I took my cell phone to make a little bit of photos. And sometimes the photos, like, people are like kind of reflective and even maybe stressed because of the material itself, but I tried to portray beauty on it. And then afterwards, like, sharing the photos, they were like grateful for being able to see themselves. And even though they thought it was funny, like, oh, I'm so reflective in this photo, and I'm like, yeah, you are. We all were. But it brings some joy to be able to see the world after you're not in the place also. Like, every photo is a time capsule in a sense.
Yes. And that is why I love a candid photo. And especially sharing that with someone, because right off the bat, they're not looking at how they looked, they're remembering how they felt at that time. And then that's what I really love about it. Like, I have a bunch of photos of my time at Macaco Labs, and people just talking and this and that. And even though it was in Portuguese, I could tell it was a happy conversation. And then I would just snap photos and I sent this to them. And then they'd be like, oh my gosh, I remember exactly what we were talking about. Da, 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 da. And like, that's why I love a candid style photo, because it's more of like how you felt at that moment rather than like, oh, I don't like my outfit. You know, you're not even going to pay attention to that. It's almost like,
Yeah.
you know, so, but yeah. So if I can create work where the first sense is about feeling rather than like sight, you know, so I'd rather someone feel something from an image that I make rather than critique it by like, oh, I like the, you know, composition here, you know, like obviously composition, you know, matters and stuff. But when someone tells me like, oh, I love how this one makes me feel, that's like the ultimate compliment for me. Like, just feel something. I don't care if you're makes you sad or happy or, you know, but if it makes you feel something, it resonates to you and what this image means to you, I feel like I've done my job.
Yeah. Yeah. That's nice. Letting, you know, feelings guide it. And before we started recording, you were talking about also feelings of stress and also feelings of happiness. And like a basic mathematics of like the less stressful you got about your work and the most that you were trying to just uh, go through the anxiety and make it because it made you happy, like the more results you were getting. And yeah, I was just wondering if you could share a little bit more about this ideas and this approach not only to your work but to your life in a sense, right?
Yes, of course. I mean, just think about like a chef, you know, or better yet, not a chef, like your grandma that cooks really good food. And what
Yeah.
is, if you ask her what's the ingredient in there, why is it so good? More than most likely, they will say, I put love into this, right? Like most of the time, they'll be, it's not going to be like, oh, because I put this much salt and like, you know, exactly this much sugar. It's like, no, because I care and I love this, what I'm making for you. And then you could taste it. So I think that's the same approach when it comes to our works and our daily lives. You know, we have the choice to um, be in a space where we're stressed out and you know, frustrated, and that'll show in your work or in your food. You know, things will get skipped because you're just worried about time, you're worried about likes, and you're worried about follows,
Yeah.
and you're worried about, you know, your peers loving or hating it. If you just make work that you love to do and you're in a good headspace while you're doing it, it'll show. So sometimes I'll not be in a good mood and maybe I'm angry about something, but I want to make photos. I have to make the conscious decision that I'm like, okay, I'm kind of not in a good space. So my work is probably going to reflect that. So maybe I'll capture that, like show that I'm in a frustrated space. But I cannot
Yeah.
go and make happy work when I'm in a frustrated space. Like it's just like you're gonna grind the wheels and it's just not gonna work, you know. So um we're all gonna have stress, and it's inevitable, you know, whether you're trying to hit a deadline or things didn't work your way or some of your tools aren't working or, you know, you had a fight with someone in your family. Like it's inevitable, it's gonna happen. And that initial hit of the stress, like, yeah, take it, accept it, acknowledge it, and know that it's there, and then move on. You know, you know, go on about your day. Like it's happened. There's nothing you could do about it. Stressing on it for the rest of the day is really not gonna do you any good. Just acknowledge it, try to figure out how to contain that, accept it, and then move on. Go to the next thing.
Yeah.
You know, I have a lot of friends that have a hard time just letting some of that stuff go. And I could see that it takes a toll on them. I could see it. They're and we all go through this, and it's not as simple as I say. It's simple, but it's not easy. Some people can't just let it go, but I kind of have that ability of like, yeah, it's kind of sucks, but what are we gonna do? We can just kind of cry about it all day, or we can go get some ice cream and try to make it better.
Yeah, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
Yeah, just a tiny bit. Just celebrate those wins, like even if it's a small one, just
Yeah,
take it. But yeah, so
totally.
I try not to be in a space like that.
Yeah, I think
But
it's
like I
like a
said,
capacity that you build. Like,
yeah,
you build up each time more disability.
yeah. I actually have this thing on my wall that I always keep, and it helps. It helps me, especially when I'm in a frustrated, almost ungrateful, like the side of me that comes out that I
Yeah.
don't like, that I just try to push away. I don't know if this is flipped. Is it flipped for you? Can you read that?
No, no, no. I can see it. Yeah.
Okay.
A grateful state of mind will set one free from a toxic mentality of negativity, misery, and disempowerment. Yeah.
So
Always good to
I
remember.
have this on my wall to help me remind myself of, when I'm getting to that point of frustration or anger, or just overall just being grumpy. I try to remind myself of that. And it really, it really, it's really true. If you're in a genuinely state of gratitude most of the time, how can you have a bad day? When you're just so
Yeah.
thankful for everything, like genuinely though thankful. Not just saying like, oh, thankful for this. Like you have to like really be grateful for everything that is happening, whether it's good or bad or fantastic. But when you're in that state of mind, it's like you can't. Even when someone tries to give you a bad day, like it just won't happen. It's like a force field. So I try to, as best as I can, to live by that quote.
Nice. Yeah, that's really nice. Well, yeah, thank you a lot for sharing this ideas and inspiration, this vision of life itself. And to wrap it up, I have a very technical question now
Yeah,
because
let's do it.
I was looking at the photos that
Mm-hmm.
we did in the workshop at Macaco
Mm-hmm.
Labs.
Yep.
You gave us this Kodak ISO 200 film. I
Mm-hmm.
don't remember more of the specifications of it, but anyways, it was color
Mm-hmm.
film stuff. And people had like very different cameras. Like some people were Pentax cameras, other people
Mm-hmm.
were with like more simple point and shoot cameras. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, the two friends, they shared with me their cameras so I could make
Mm-hmm.
a couple of photos.
Yeah.
And I was noticing the difference between photos made in one camera and the other, like the difference in color, especially.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some photos that were kind of frustrated because they were like out of focus, and I couldn't realize they were out of focus. But
Yeah.
anyway, that
Yeah.
stuff happens as well.
Yeah.
But I was just like wondering, how much does the camera influence when you're photographing with film? Because yeah, sometimes it was pretty different, and I know that like you can still get the photos in, color them in a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
but like most of it felt like it was chemical. It was like it was actually in the film itself.
Yeah. So that can factor it, but if we're looking at the main differences of those, because like you said, they're shot with different cameras, different lenses. I would say the most
Yeah.
important factor in there are the lenses. So someone had a camera with a really nice piece of glass, and then some have a point and shoot, and some had a disposable where like the lens is actually plastic, it's not even glass.
Yeah.
And then you also have to factor in the metering system in those cameras. Some of them might overexpose, some of it might underexpose, and then some of them have a fully manual camera where they can control those things. I would say like half of them had point and shoots where the camera electronically was deciding for them what the shutter speed should be or what aperture it should be. So literally all they could do is point and shoot. And then there is also that chemical factor because we were trying to do the workshop and just trying to get through it. And we knew that we went on a photo walk and it's more for demonstration purposes. We weren't really trying to get anything that could be, fine art or anything like that. It was more for like memories, like let's have fun, let's do this. And then you could definitely tell who had like a more advanced camera, and I could tell by the lens quality, and then the exposure was right. But yeah, a lot of it has to do with what lens you're using, and what camera you're using. So, it's an ongoing question that, people will always say, gear doesn't matter. They always say that, like, gear doesn't matter. Like, the best camera is the camera that is on you, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I agree to it with some point. Like, I agree that
of course.
you can make a good photograph out of anything, any camera. You can make a good photograph with your iPhone, a disposable camera, as long as you have that eye and good composition and this and that. You can make that. But when it comes to what you visually want, like, I cannot make those images with a disposable camera. So at some point, gear does matter. And
for sure.
I don't know where I heard this quote from, but I was watching a YouTube channel. I watched tons of YouTube channels on other photographers, and the way they described the cameras is, a camera is like a paintbrush, like a painter doesn't just have one paintbrush for everything, they have multiple paintbrushes. So that's why I have multiple different cameras, depending on what I'm trying to do, what image I'm trying to eventually get to. I need that certain camera, or lens or filter or film stock in order to get that image that I want. So I'm like, I want something very vibrant, so I'm going to use Kodak Ektar 100, and it needs to be like very small grain, very sharp. Or I want something that feels a little more moody and less clinically perfect. Then I go with something that has more grain, maybe black and white, and then I shoot it at a slower speed so that there's a little bit of a blur. You can't do that with all cameras. You can't do a slow shutter speed if you wanted to on a disposable, because it just doesn't have that functionality. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
No, totally, it does. It does. Yeah, I just got like 4 rolls of film, and I'm gonna make a trip to like this rural area with a couple of friends.
And what I would do is, and I don't know if you already know this, so feel free to stop me if you already do, but just research to see what the dynamic range is of that film.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And then that will let you know how far you can overexpose it or underexpose it. So for instance, a film stock like Portra 400 or Portra 800 has insane dynamic range. Like, you can literally overexpose it by 4 stops, and yeah, you'll get a really cool pastel-y look and still retain all of the highlights. So for me, when I'm shooting under harsh light, I'll typically overexpose it by a stop or 2. So then that way you don't get those crazy shadows. So you get some shadow details. Because if you expose it perfectly for that scene, it might be too contrasty between the shadows and highlights. And then you'll just get these really dark shadows, and then you'll lose the detail in them. So I know digitally you usually underexpose. So then that way you don't blow it out, right? But we have to remember that on film it's negative, so it's reverse.
Damn. Okay, that makes sense right now. Yeah.
So if you underexpose, that means you're gonna lose everything that's in the shadows. You won't retain it at all. And then you might get your highlights okay, but if you're using a film stock like Portra where you can overexpose, so a good rule of thumb for film photographers is if you're not sure about the metering of your scene, overexpose all the time. If you're shooting negative, color negative. So like I said, like let's say you're metering it and it's saying like, okay, yeah, this is good, but you're still unsure, you're not trusting the meter. You're like, yeah, you're metering for the highlights probably. So I'll overexpose it by 2 stops just so I can retain some of that shadow detail.
Yeah.
And that's what makes film different than
digital. Totally.
You know, because I can overexpose 3 to 4 stops and the highlights will still retain because it's a negative. So it's reverse. For instance, if I want to overexpose Portra 800, you just rate your film at ISO 400. So then that way your camera thinks it needs more light, and then it'll obviously overexpose it by 1 stop. So that's what I'll do. It's like I have different film stocks, and I mainly only have like Kodak film stocks, like Kodak Gold 200, Portra 400, Portra 800, sometimes Portra 160. But I literally have to go look outside and go, yeah, it's not that sunny out, so I got to use Portra 800. Or if it's extremely sunny, I'm like, ooh, Gold 200 might look good outside. And the way I shoot those film stocks would probably look different from another person, the way they shoot that film stock. Because underexposing and overexposing can result in different colors, and the way the light catches. So there's that whole thing. So there's that possibility of it. So, and the reason why a lot of photographers love Portra is because it's very consistent. So I know what I'm going to get when I shoot Portra 400, like 8 out of 10 times. It's very consistent. And then the way people see Portra is like, it's like shooting raw on digital. Because then you'll get this flat base of your image. And then when you bring it into, when you're scanning it, you can manipulate how you want it to look as far as colors go. You know, so it could stay looking flat, or it can be very contrasty, or it could be very colorful, or it could be very muted, no saturation. So you can do a lot with it versus other film stocks where it's like you only have like this much wiggle room as far as how you want the final image to look. But yeah, man, any other like, you know, questions that you have in the future, definitely like hit me up.
Perfect.
I love this stuff, and I love talking about it, and I love seeing where people take it, and I love when people are starting to get like really excited about it. Like it makes me feel like, it makes me remember like when I was getting excited about it. It's like doing it for the first time, you know, and I'm like, oh man, it's so cool. And just hearing all the students from the workshop like still doing it and showing me their work, like, hey, check this out. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Yeah, just keep sending it, you know. But yeah, just hit me up, and I definitely this interview was fun. Anytime you need me, I'm here for you.
Nice, nice. Yeah, well, so thank you a lot for, your availability, your generosity, and your whole ideas. And let's continue. I hope everyone also appreciated the interview, and let's go.
All right.
Okay.
Woo, Bahia.
Yeah.